we're looking forward to the challenge. We're looking forward to results. And I can't tell you how much you and your members, as well as other small businesses across the state, have been so supportive of us in this mission. And we're very much looking forward to being the voice of small business as we move forward and make sure we understand the impact that has, the positive impact it has on our state's economy.
The Small Business Rundown is the official podcast of the National Federation of Independent Business, the member-driven voice of small business. NFIB and our members advocate to keep America's small businesses strong and independent in Washington, D.C., all 50 states, and the nation's courts.
Welcome to the Small Business Rundown, a biweekly podcast with information on independent businesses' victories and challenges in Washington, D.C. and state capitals. I'm Adam Temple, NFIB Senior Vice President of Advocacy. The path to pro-small business laws and regulations starts with electing candidates who support pro-small business policies, as well as lawmakers who own or have owned a small business. In a few minutes, we'll speak with a longtime small business owner, Mike Kehoe, the governor-elect in Missouri. And first, we'll hear from Representative-elect Mark Messmer from Indiana's 8th Congressional District, who's also co-owner of his family's business, Messmer Mechanical. Congressman-elect Mark Messmer, thanks for joining us today on the Small Business Rundown.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Sir, could you start by telling us a little bit about your family-owned business?
Sure. So my dad started the company in 1970. He had a couple of employees when he started the company. And as me and my two brothers joined the company, the company grew. We're now about 45 employees, 45 to 50. And then we bought them out in 2003. We do primarily service work on residential, commercial, and industrial work. We do a lot of installation and replacement work on commercial and industrial HVAC projects. And then on the new construction, we're primarily commercial and industrial.
And as a small business owner, why did you decide to run for office?
Well, that's an interesting story. It all comes on the heels of the 2005 Base Realignment Commission process, and our Crane Naval Surface Warfare Center was on the targeted list to be closed. But from a strong push from our governor and the folks within the Crane leadership team, they were able to get pulled off the BRAC list on the final day. And a lot of that came on the commitment from Mitch Daniels to get the I-69 highway built to the base. They had been promising Crane for about 30 years at that point. And it was based on a funding program that he was going to bring to the 2006 legislative session called the Major Moves Funding Bill that was going to be used to build I-69 from Evansville to Crane. And my current state representative at the time voted no on the bill. Knowing what was at stake, with the potential of losing Crane, which is probably the largest employer south of Indianapolis. It was too late to file to run in 2006, but I had been really very politically active my entire adult life. A lot of that comes from a big influence from my dad. I mean, I would constantly call and write senators and representatives at the state and federal level when dealing with issues that impact, business and especially small business. And after that incident in 2006, I decided whatever it took to learn how to run against him in 2008, I was going to do it. Filed and got my committee started in early 2007 and won that election in 2008. And really the ability to influence policy, that impacts small business at the state level has been a big impact and a big focus of mine during my time in the Indiana General Assembly, and I intend to move that influence and direction to the federal level.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's not Congress is new for you, but it's not your first rodeo in politics. Obviously, you just mentioned your state government experience. During that time, as a small business owner, how does that influence the way that you operate in policymaking and politics?
Well, I always look at tax and regulatory policy and how it impacts small business. Without, we don't have large legal departments. We don't have large accounting departments. There's a big difference between policy and how it impacts, large employers, people with 500 or 1,000 or tens of thousands of employees. They just view life differently. Regulators don't always separate the impact on how it impacts small businesses compared to large companies. And that even comes into play. You wouldn't think so, but even on an issue dealing with firefighters, about 80% of the firefighters across the state and across the country are volunteer. And how it impacts them is completely different than professional fire departments that have full-time staffs and ability to train. So, the same impact, falls into issues dealing with volunteer firefighters versus professional as it does small business versus large.
Sure. And you kind of touched on this, but why do you think it's important to have small business owners as lawmakers?
Small business owners have a great perspective on how the business world operates And small businesses employ about 75 to 80% of the employees across the state and across the country. And so you really have to factor in, the impact of laws and regulations and how it impacts a small business. And I think the more small business owners we have, I think the better job government would do. And at the state level, the majority of our members at the House and Senate are small business owners, and why we operate so effectively at the state level.
Yeah, yeah. And, I know you are prepping to be sworn in January 3rd, and a lot of small business owners listen to this podcast. As you do prepare to come to Congress, are there any small business policy priorities that you'd like for them to hear about?
Absolutely. It'll be a high priority of mine, and I think of our conference as a whole, to get the 2017 tax provisions extended and make as many of them permanent as possible. The 199A tax deductions are a huge impact and a huge benefit to small businesses, and really was done when they made the C Corporation tax rate changes permanent in 2017. The 20% deduction really gives parity to small businesses because they don't have all the same advantages as the large companies. And, the other extensions within that 2017 tax bill, we didn't either extend them or make as many permanent as we can.
Yeah, agreed. And whether it's a state legislative body or in the U.S. Congress, how important is it for lawmakers to hear directly from NFIB members on these issues?
Well, I can come at that from being an NFIB member for a long time before I was a legislator.
Thank you.
I was an NFIB member, and I valued the input and the eyes and ears that the NFIB can be for the NFIB members at the state and national level, keeping members notified on laws, regulations, and how they impact small business, taking that input, from and the surveys they do for the NFIB members. I've filled out, dozens of those over the years, and then taking that input to the members of Congress is very important. And I think they've got a pretty heavy voice at Washington and, at the state level because of the large number of employees they represent and the fact that they are the small business owners of this country. So
absolutely. Well, before we go, I know you have plenty to do. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, I'm going to be a champion to help repeal as many oppressive rules and regulations that have come from the administrative state over the past 4 years. We deal with those regularly, and I've got some in the drafting stage already, and I'll be willing and ready to sign off any repeal of over-aggressive rules that have been put into place, not only the last 4 years, but really in the history of our country. We've got too many regulations that really strangle and overburden small business owners.
Outstanding to hear. If it were appropriate to applaud on a podcast, we'd be doing it right now. Congressman-elect Mark Messmer, I want to thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to working with you after you're swearing in on the 3rd.
Thank you for the time.
Our next guest is Governor-elect Mike Kehoe, who had a chance to talk with NFIB's Missouri State Director, Brad Jones, about running for office as a small business owner and more. Now we'll hear that interview.
This is Brad Jones with NFIB Missouri, and I would love to welcome Governor-elect Mike Kehoe. Governor, thanks for being with us today.
Brad, thank you so much for having me on. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about, because not everybody knows your background, and I mean, you are a small business guy at heart. And I want to go do the Wayback Machine just a little bit to your neighborhood in North St. Louis. I know all cities are sort of made up of little communities all around them, and I think that was probably the case when you were growing up. What were some of were there some neighborhood small businesses around you up there in the north, and you thought, these are wonderful places and part of our community and part of our neighborhood?
Well, we're from North City, St. Louis, as you mentioned, and there was a small business on every corner, Brad. And back in those days, and I don't want people to think I'm too awfully old, but a lot of those businesses, you just signed a little slip and they kept a running total. We had a confectionery up the street from our house that we called, people today would probably call it a C-store or something like that. It didn't have a gas station, but it was a corner little mini market. And we called it Canaan's Confectionery was the name of it. And the small business family owners, from there to the local tire store. I can remember Boss Amoco, which was the standard gas station that when your parents went and got gas in their car, you could go up later on and Mr. Boss would fill your bike tires with air. And it was all Snoobar's Bakery. It was all family-owned small businesses in our little community. And it's really what made it great. It's, as you know, small business is what makes this country great. And certainly our part of the St. Louis area, it was a fantastic area.
You were raised by a saint who your mother had 6 children, and she pretty much raised all you by herself. And I know, Mike, she was a huge influence in your life growing up.
Oh, yeah, she was incredible. My father left when I was a year old. I was the youngest of those 6. So my mom really had 2 days a year we celebrated her, both on Mother's Day and Father's Day. She was both to us. She was a hard worker. She worked multiple jobs, most times 3, sometimes more jobs than that, to support our family. And that's what she taught us, is that she's a woman of great faith. She was a daily communicant. We were close enough to church. She could walk to church every morning at 6 a.m. But her simple instructions to us were, if you want to do good in this world, work harder and pray harder. And if you do those 2 things, the world's yours. You can do whatever you want to do. And my sisters and my brother all took that advice. And thankfully, we all made it out of that neighborhood alive and went on to start great careers and great businesses. And it was all, because of my mother and her influence on us.
Well, those are 2 great pieces of advice. The other person that I wanted to mention, you have spoken of him fondly on the campaign trail and throughout the many years that you and I have known each other, and that was Dave Sinclair. For those of you out there listening, Dave Sinclair had the largest Ford dealership in the whole metro St. Louis area, and he did right by a little kid named Mike Kehoe. Didn't he allow you to wash a car or 2, Mike?
Yeah, he let me start washing cars when I was 15. He had been a childhood friend of my mother, so my mom knew him. And Mr. Sinclair had a great Ford business, was a great small business operator himself, really gave people a lot of opportunity. So many people came through that dealership that he helped get in their own business. It's amazing. And he never really wanted credit, or that wasn't what he was all about. He was another person who believed in hard work pays off. Don't be a clock watcher was always his advice to everybody all day long. And he certainly taught me a lot about business, how to treat people, treat customers. And by the way, when I ultimately, after washing cars at 15, I ultimately became his truck manager at the age of 23, the youngest Ford truck manager in the United States. And we actually, in 1985 and 86, were the largest Ford dealer in the United States. So it was quite a big volume store. Very well recognized by Ford Motor Company, obviously. And so all of those pieces of that puzzle ended up coming back into my life later. But my start in business and really how to treat people, and the person who had the most male influence, a father figure to me, was definitely Mr. Sinclair.
Then you moved over to Osage Industries. It is a company that produces ambulances, does it not, and other emergency vehicles?
Yeah, well, Mr. Sinclair was part owner in that, and Dave had 7 kids, so they used to tease me and say I was the 8th adopted. And I mean, I was a realist, he was a realist, but while he has 7 children, there probably wasn't much room for me to ever be able to get into ownership of his Ford dealership, which I clearly understood and appreciated. And he called me in his office one day and said, I want you to go down to Osage and see if you can run that plant. They were producing conversion vans and trucks at the time. And he said, this would be your shot. If you want to get into business, it may not ever happen here. I'll always help you try to find a business, but this is a good way to put your toe in the water. Oh, by the way, the place is not doing very well, and you could end up having to shut it down. So those were the 2 options. I didn't know anything about manufacturing. I didn't know where Lynn, Missouri was. It's dead central in Osage County in central Missouri. Picked up my bags and went to Lynn, Missouri on a Monday morning and never looked back. We eventually, with the help of a lot of people, Brad, I've always had help from a lot of people. We transitioned from building conversion vans and trucks, which were a great business, but very seasonal, into building emergency vehicles, and ended up selling that business to the employees. I'm very proud of them. Today, that business houses over 140 employees, and they're one of the largest emergency vehicle manufacturers in the United States. And so super proud of what that company has done. And really the employees, as you know, really make the difference in any business. I happen to be there to get them started and shepherd them through some tough times, but they're the hardest working people I've ever met. And they really have made that company a great success.
And you transitioned from that. When did you have the opportunity to buy the Ford dealership?
Well, I remember part of our business before we fully transitioned out of conversion vans was also selling vans and trucks to dealers that were customized. I met the owner of that dealership in the early 90s. We began a conversation about acquiring it in 91 and ultimately acquired it in June of 92. Again, Mr. Sinclair was very helpful to me. That's why I recall he was very influential with Ford Motor Company, because Ford said, that guy's too young. We're not going to let him buy that store. And Dave literally just picked up the phone, called the president of Ford Motor Company and said, I want Kehoe in that Jeff City store. And I was the youngest Ford dealer in the United States at the time. And so, things work out sometimes, but a lot of people helped me. And that was a really cool deal. I traveled a lot with Osage. And after I got Osage going and moving, I met that nice young lady you've met before named Claudia Kehoe. And we got married and had a child, and traveling, several days a week was not the greatest thing to help raise a family. So transitioning into the dealership where you're working long hours, you're involved in the community, as you mentioned, but at least you're home every night, fit our family much better.
Absolutely. You then decided at some point to run for public office. Mike, what makes you so effective is the fact that you lived some life before you ran for the Senate. I know it's cliche and we use it all the time, but we love people that have signed both sides of the paycheck at NFIB.
Well, Brad, I will tell you one of the things that got me into politics, and I'm not trying to cater to you or your listeners, is my membership in NFIB. As you recall, the entire time we were at the dealership, I was a member, some years more active in some of your policy committees and whatnot, and I learned a lot about what the government can do to really stifle small business sometimes, and what we need to do to create paths for businesses to expand and grow. And I would say, combined with what I learned from NFIB and some of your members, you had some rock star members, as I recall, up in the Columbia area that were in the lumber business, and we really had a great relationship with. But between that and serving on our local Chamber of Commerce and understanding how important that piece of business is to Jefferson City, and we're a company town in Jefferson City, and our company is the state of Missouri. We had an opening in the state Senate seat, and really Carl Vogel, who you knew very well, our Coca-Cola distributor, was the senator. He very much was a proponent of having elected officials, to your point, that have signed both sides of a check. It really gives you a different policy perspective when you've had to have risk capital out there, when you've had to make payroll to people, sometimes without enough money in the bank, by the way, to cover the payroll checks. I've experienced all those things, and I think that's the type of men and ladies you'd like to serve you at all levels of government, whether it's city council or state representative or state senator. Having a voice of business within the Capitol makes a huge difference for many, many, many Missourians.
Well, I just think it does something with your perspective when you talk about these economic conceptions out there of inflation, and you talk about, labor issues, and you talk about some of these things. As small business people, you live those things. Those are not conceptual to you.
Yeah, I was sitting there, as you recall, I was also on the Missouri Highway Transportation Commission as a way to give back to public service. It's a volunteer job, but it's a big job. And I was sitting there waiting to talk to a senator about a transportation issue one day, and I was not in the legislature. Two senators were debating a bill that would have a big effect on how we pay unemployment. And I remember I ended up meeting both of those folks. They were really good people, but they had no idea how the Missouri unemployment system works. And I'm sitting in the gallery. You've done this before. Why don't you yell like, hey, no, you're not. This is not how that works. And actually went and met them off of the floor afterwards just to say, I know your intentions are good, but what you're describing on how we work with unemployment insurance and how a business pays in and how the insurance trust works is not accurate. And so you and I have dealt with that issue after I got into the legislature quite a bit. But that was just an example of two nice people. I knew them both. They were very good people. They thought they were doing the right thing, but they had never owned a business. They had never paid into unemployment. They had never went through that experience of what it's like to work through those issues. So I believe that keeping small business people who have had those experiences, both good and bad, in a position to affect policy is really good for our economy.
The thing that I really have been so impressed with what you've done is that Buy Missouri program, because so many of our small businesses and NFIB members are part of the Buy Missouri program. You took it from the governor, and we're up to over 700, I think, members now of people that produce products just in Missouri for Missouri. It's been great, and I sure hope it continues with the new lieutenant governor.
Oh, yeah, we're going to figure that out one way or the other. But Mike Parson, to his credit, when he was lieutenant governor, started the idea of Buy Missouri. And then he had just kind of gotten it started when he was tapped to be governor. And then he tapped me to be lieutenant governor. So I took over the program from him. But he got a good start to it. But you're right. We're at 700 companies now, over 17,000 employees. We're in 100 of Missouri's 114 counties with Buy Missouri members. We have small family-owned businesses. You know them, just with one or two employees. We've got large 1,200-person businesses. But all products manufactured here in Missouri, and we want the lieutenant governor's office to be the voice for small business, and that's what I certainly hope and have portrayed to our incoming lieutenant governor. These are small businesses that have a problem. They don't know how to get a hold of a Department of Revenue, a Department of Labor, or natural resources, or some of these permitting issues or government issues that, quite frankly, can be onerous. And they were able to call us And we did it as a reason, when Mike Parsons started, it was really to have a way to market Missouri-made products. And we certainly still do that. And that's the core focus. But the organic piece that grew out of that is those businesses be able to have somebody within state government at a high-ranking level. When they needed help, they could reach out to and say, how do we navigate this issue? And so it really has become, as you point out, kind of an advocacy piece for small business. And our Buy Missouri members are some of the best people I've ever met. You're right. A lot of them are NFIB members. And so we have a lot in common with that.
You will be elected our governor on January the 13th. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about some of your goals for helping the small business community?
I sure will. First of all, let me just tell you and your members that I am still an NFIB member. I brought my renewal check to this meeting because I thought I'd see you in person. So now I'm going to have the old checks in the mail. But through our beef cattle production business, since I've gotten out of the Ford business, or mainly just a consultant, I decided to continue my membership in NFIB. That's how important it is to me through our ranch. So I want to make sure people understand how important it is to have that voice both at a state and a national level. And it's an incredible investment that any business can make. But you're right. Our hand comes off the Bible on January 13th. We'll enact our Day One crime plan. We believe keeping our neighborhoods and communities safe, giving the men and ladies who protect us, who wear the uniform, the resources they need to keep communities safe is the first line of defense and the plan that we'll enact the quickest. But shortly thereafter, our economic development plan includes a lot of regulatory reform. We've asked each of the directors, as we're interviewing them for potential spots within our administration, to spend a certain amount of time every month looking at their regulatory environment and how they can roll those back and how we can get rid of burdensome, unnecessary regulations. We say all the time that when a business wants to expand or move or start here in Missouri, they can look at what the tax code is and make decisions on local codes and different things they know that requires to open that business. They don't know about the guy that's come knocking on their door the second day they're in business with a inspection or a regulation they didn't even know existed. So regulatory reform within small business is big for me. Tort reform, the environment that we have within our courts. I believe everybody should have their day in court, but small businesses are just getting beat up by some of these frivolous lawsuits. And a good member of yours and a friend of mine said to me one day in committee, a senator asked him, well, how many lawsuits have you lost? And he said, I can't afford to win anymore. I haven't lost any, but I can't afford to keep winning. So regulatory reform, litigation reform, and then just overall economic development environment through our transportation and infrastructure expansion, workforce development expansion. It's a big deal to a lot of your members to make sure we continue with career and technical training at our schools across the state, encourage young men and ladies to pick up a skill or a trade that they think will be helpful to them, and then work with that end employer on what they need training for. We think that's a big time hand in the glove match that Missouri can do better than most other states. So multiple pieces that your business members will really like, and we're excited to get that going.
I will put on my tux on January 13th, and I can't wait to see you and Claudia, and it's going to be a great 4 years. We're really looking forward to it.
Well, I appreciate your kindness. Both Claudia and I feel blessed to have this opportunity to represent the state of Missouri. We're looking forward to the challenge. We're looking forward to results. And I can't tell you how much you and your members, as well as other small businesses across the state, have been so supportive of us in this mission. And we're very much looking forward to being the voice of small business as we move forward and make sure we understand the impact that has, the positive impact it has on our state's economy.
That's great. Good to talk to you, as always. And we will see you on the 13th.
All right, buddy. Well, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you and your members. And thank you so much again for being involved with the state of Missouri and advocating for our family-owned businesses.
You too, Governor. Have a great Christmas.
I want to thank our guests again for sitting down to talk with us about what it means to serve in government as a small business owner. If you'd like to learn more about NFIB's advocacy for pro-small business policies in Congress and in all 50 states, or learn more about running for an office as a small business owner yourself, take a look at today's show notes. And with questions for future podcast episodes, send us an email at podcast@nfib.org. Now, I want to thank you, the listeners, for joining us on today's Small Business Rundown. We'll be back every 2 weeks bringing you news and analysis from Washington, D.C. and state capitals so that you, whether you're a small business owner or a supporter of one, can continue to blaze a trail.
The Small Business Rundown is brought to you by NFIB, the voice of small business. You can find us at nfib.com and on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.